I used to think buying seeds was the easiest part of gardening. You pick what looks good, grab a few packets, and that's kind of it, right? That was basically how I treated it. If the picture looked good, I liked the idea of growing it, or got a little too excited about some dramatic heirloom at midnight. I figured that was good enough. And honestly, when you're new, that feels reasonable, because seeds look like the simple part. Tiny packet, tiny decision. But the more I gardened, the more I realized some of the problems I blamed on watering, timing, or my setup actually started before I planted anything, sometimes right at the packet. And later in this video, I'm going to show you how to decode a seed packet so you can tell whether the plant actually fits your space, your season, or the kind of gardener you are right now, because that would have saved me a lot of frustration. So today I want to talk about seed sourcing, but not in a here are the best seed companies kind of way, because honestly, that wasn't the part that confused me most. What confused me most was thinking that if seeds were available and I liked the plant, that automatically meant it was a good fit. And no, that is not how it works, because buying seeds is not just shopping, it's planning, it's filtering, it's editing. And once I understood that, a lot of my earlier mistakes started making a lot more sense.
Tiny packet, suspiciously large consequences.
Exactly, because I think this is one of the first quiet mistakes beginner gardeners make. You think you're just buying seeds, but what you're really doing is making a bunch of tiny decisions that shape your whole season before it even starts. And if you don't know how to read those decisions yet, it's really easy to accidentally build a garden that doesn't actually fit your time, your space, or your setup. That's why this will make more sense later when we decode a packet together. Because the problem usually isn't just the plant, it's the fit. The first mistake I made was thinking seed packets all kind of meant the same thing. Like, if I want tomatoes, I buy tomatoes. Problem solved. But then you realize you're not just choosing a tomato. You're choosing a version of tomatoes. Different days to maturity, different growth habits, different sizes, different spacing needs, different harvest pattern. And that changes the decision completely, because now the question isn't just, do I want tomatoes? It's, do I want the kind of tomatoes that actually makes sense for the season, this place, and this version of me as a gardener? That is a very different question. And I think beginners, or at least I did, often buy for the fantasy garden first, not the real one. You see something beautiful or interesting or productive and your brain just goes, yes, obviously, I am now the kind of person who grows 12 ambitious things successfully. And maybe, but maybe not all at once.
Hope is not a planting plan.
Exactly. Because this is where seed buying starts turning into future stress. Not because the seeds are bad, but because the decision might be a mismatch. A plant can be something you technically can grow and still not be something that makes sense in your actual season, especially if you're starting late, especially if your space is limited, especially if you're trying to squeeze too many long season crops into 1 year because everything looked exciting in February. And that creates a frustrating gardening experience later, because it feels like the garden failed halfway through when really the mismatch may have started at the packet. That's part of why I started thinking less about what do I want to buy and more about what am I actually trying to make happen this season. That question helped me way more, because if I don't know what I want out of the season, then I'm not really planning. I'm just collecting possibilities, and collecting possibilities is not the same as making good choices. This is also why I ended up building SproutLog and the filtering logic the way I did, because I realized I didn't need more inspiration. I was already excellent at wanting plants. What I needed was a better filter, something that helped me sort through what actually made sense for the season, the space, and the stage of gardening. Because the packet can look amazing and still be a bad fit. And once space gets involved, that gets even more obvious, because the seed packet is tiny. The plant it becomes is usually not. That sounds obvious now, but I really underestimated it. A single zucchini seed can become an absolute space bully. And that means one tiny harmless looking packet can quietly turn into a very large commitment. So the question stops being what looks cool and becomes what deserves the space? And later, when we decode the packet, this is exactly the kind of thing you can catch earlier. Because once I started looking at seeds that way, I stopped treating every packet like an equal opportunity candidate. They're not. Some make sense for the season, some don't. Some are worth experimenting with, some are just future stress in a very attractive envelope.
Intent, fit, reliable source.
That's honestly the whole thing. Intent, fit, reliable source. And once I started thinking that way, the supplier question got a lot easier too. Not irrelevant, just easier. Because I stopped looking for the magical best seed company and started looking for sources that help me make clearer decisions. That's why I naturally gravitated towards names like West Coast Seeds over time. Not because the company solves every problem, but because clear information makes better decisions. And honestly, that matters more than people think. Because once you start shopping online especially, there are so many options it becomes really easy to confuse abundance with good planning. And that's where I think a lot of beginners get overwhelmed. Not because they don't care, because they care, but because they don't have a filter yet. So let's get into the part I wish I understood much earlier. How to actually decode a seed packet. Because this is where a lot of beginner frustration could have been prevented way earlier. When I used to look at a seed packet, I mostly saw the front. Pretty plant, nice name, maybe a quick description. Now I look at it more like a summary of my future consequences. Because a seed packet is quietly telling you whether the plant fits your garden, if you know what to look for. The first thing I pay attention to is when to start it. That matters because not every seed fits your calendar the same way. Some things want a long indoor head start. Some grow fast and don't need much lead time. Some are better direct sown. And if you miss that, you can end up starting too early, too late, or creating way more indoor seed starting work than you expected. The next thing I look at is days to maturity, because that tells you whether I realistically have enough season to make this work. That number is not everything, but it's a huge clue. If something takes a long time to mature, I need to be honest about whether my season, timing, and patience actually line up with that. When I look at spacing, this is a big one. Because spacing is one of the ways a packet tells you whether your garden dreams and your actual square footage are having the same conversation. And a lot of beginner overwhelm starts right here. Too many plants, too little room, too much competition later. Then I look at the size at maturity, because that tiny seed is not staying tiny. That one matters for containers, raised beds, small gardens, and honestly just expectations. A plant that matures much larger than you pictured is not a small mistake. It changes what else you can fit around it, how much support it might need, and how much maintenance it creates later. Then I look at light requirements, because I can plant all day long, but if the conditions I actually have don't line up, that matters more than my optimism. And I think this is one of those places beginners unintentionally build disappointment into their plan. The plant itself may not be the issue. The mismatch is. And then there's one of the most useful things to understand. What kind of growing habit or harvest pattern are you signing up for? Tomatoes are a really good example of this. Because if you're choosing between determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, you're not just choosing between two tomato varieties. You're choosing between two different gardening experiences. A determinate tomato tends to stay more compact. It gives you a bigger, more concentrated harvest over a shorter window. An indeterminate tomato keeps growing and producing over a long period of time, which can be amazing, but it also means more support, more management, and more ongoing relationship with that plant all season. So even if both are tomatoes, they're not asking the same thing from you. And that's really the bigger lesson here. A seed packet is not just telling you what the plant is. It's telling you what kind of commitment it becomes.
A seed is a commitment with a surprisingly cute logo.
That is unfortunately very accurate, because once you buy the packet, you didn't just buy an idea. You bought the timing, you bought the tray space, you bought the watering, you bought the thinning, you bought the hardening off, you bought the transplant decisions, you bought the mental bandwidth. That little packet is not neutral. It's the start of a chain. And the more clearly you can read that chain at the packet stage, the easier it gets to build the garden that actually feels manageable. So these days, I try to think about seed sourcing in layers. First, what do I actually want out of this season? Then, what crops make sense for that? Then, what varieties fit my timeline, space, light, and climate? Then, where do I want to source those seeds from? That order changed a lot for me, because before I started with availability. What looks interesting? What can I buy? What sounds exciting? Now I try to start with intent. What am I actually building? And that one shift makes seed buying feel way less random. Usually less expensive too. And I think that's the real takeaway here. Seed sourcing doesn't need to feel intimidating, but it also isn't as simple as I thought it was. It's one of those early gardening steps that seems small until you realize how much it affects everything that comes after. So if buying seeds has ever felt weirdly overwhelming, or if you've ever looked back halfway through the season and thought, why did I choose all of this? You're definitely not alone. That usually doesn't mean you're bad at gardening. It usually just means nobody explained that seed sourcing is part of the system too, not just the shopping.
Less treasure hunt, more quiet strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Because once those seeds actually sprout, all those packet decisions stopped being ideas and start becoming variables. Tray space, watering, airflow, light, thinning, monitoring, timing. And if you choose without a real filter, that is where beginner gardening can start to feel messy fast. So the next video I want to talk about what happens after the packet, because that's where all of these good intentions either stay manageable or start slipping out of your hands.